I'm from a smaller town in southeast Texas near Beaumont. This happened 2 years ago while I was working for a security company while still in college. It was Christmas Eve, and I had picked up a couple extra shifts for the holiday pay. On one of my night shifts, I had to work at a new location. I had never been to this site before, and the day shift guard didn't say a word about any suspicious stuff happening besides the occasional homeless person seeking shelter. This place was a massive metal company who fills rail cars with all different metals and minerals to ship cross-country. I found it odd they only had one guard for a place this big, but the company I worked for did not have the best reputation. I arrived for my 12-hour shift, and the first couple hours nothing happened. I was watching some YouTube videos to pass the time, and every hour I had to walk the entire property to make sure the place was empty and nothing bad was happening. Every single walk around the entire property took me about 20 to 30 minutes to complete. As I said, the place was too big for only one security guard. It was around 1 a.m. and it was time to do a walk around the property again. While I was walking around, I came across a light that was turned on in a storage room that had been off the other 7 times I had passed by that night. I know for sure it was off before because I had looked inside on one of my previous walks just out of curiosity. The room was about 10 by 10 meters and only had shelves with different samples of metal in each container. I walked inside and examined the light switch. It was not a motion-activated one, nor was it a timer. This light switch was a strong, heavy switch, which was rather hard to flip compared to normal switches, so this could not have been an accidental switch flip on my part. The very second I flipped the switch to turn the lights off, my heart sank to my ankles because from across the hall in the laboratory, a radio turned on. I had been through this exact hall 7 times before this night, and not once did I hear the radio on, not even when I was 5 steps across the hall from the lab. I walked through the lab and turned the radio off, peeking out the door to see if a worker had come in without me knowing. There wasn't a single car in the lot besides mine. I closed and locked the door back. Now being an army vet and a larger man 6'1" and 255 pounds, I do not get scared easily, but for some reason a large feeling of fear and dread filled me up. It was just like when you flip the lights off and you feel like something is chasing you up the stairs. I walked out of the lab and with my big spotlight made my way into the warehouse. No sooner than when the swinging doors shut, I heard people talking, only 2 voices and hardly audible. It was slightly louder than whispering, but I could not make out what they were saying, but I could hear it clear as day. It was a full conversation they were having. My blood turned cold because now I had no reason to believe I was alone. I shouted out that I'm security and informing them they cannot be here at this hour and to come out. I heard one of the voices whisper a harsh and loud shh, almost like it was telling the other to be quiet. After several more unsuccessful attempts to order whoever it was to come out, I began searching. I looked high and low for over an hour and a half in any spot a person could fit in and found nothing. No footprints in the thin layer of metal dust. No signs of forced entry or exit. Nothing indicating anyone else was there. After my long search, I went back to my desk to eat and continue watching my show while reporting what I saw and heard. I went on to do 2 more tours before the final event of the night happened. Now our company has lieutenants that patrol around all the sites, making sure everything is okay and making sure we aren't asleep. The time is unannounced, and none of the security guards know when they show up. So at about 4:30 a.m., when I heard the heavy locked metal fire door at the end of the hall open and clear distinct boot steps walking towards me, I yelled out, "Good morning, Lieutenant!" 30 seconds went by, and I no longer heard walking nor any response to my greeting. I jumped out of my chair, running down the hall, looking for who that was. I once again checked the parking lot, and my vehicle was the only one in the lot. I once again checked the entire place. It took me 2 hours, but I found nothing. When the first employee showed up, I told him of my night, and he told me no one has ever had any weird experiences there, so I was the first one to experience something like this. That was my last shift at that place. I never went there again. Was it just a bad night? Was all of it just hallucinations because of lack of sleep? But I'm sure what I saw and heard was real, and not just a hallucination. I'll never know for sure. Me and my family have always been huge Christmas enjoyers. When I was about 15, we always had huge Christmas parties at our house. My friends, cousins, grandparents, other family members, their friends, and so on. Easily 30 to 40 people would come over and hang out inside or outside our house. There was always a lot of drinking, loud music and laughing. Those parties were really enjoyable and created some unforgettable memories. One of the memories I have from those parties is not so positive. On one particular Christmas night, we invited everyone over like usual. I was sitting in the kitchen with some friends. Some people were hanging out outside, others were just walking around. It was pretty crowded overall. We would keep tables on our front porch that held food because our kitchen was little, and everyone always brought a dish of their own so we could have a lot of variety of food to eat from. Long after we opened the Christmas presents and ate, my dad and 3 uncles were feeling pretty drunk, and let me say my dad was 6'2" and 200 pounds, and my uncles were not as tall, but all crazy Detroit-raised Irish men, who I've seen put the fear of God into men 3 times their size. My uncles were not the men to mess with back in those days. As I said, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my friends when I saw a man wearing blue jeans and a red silk top come up the basement stairs. At first, I thought he was a friend of one of my uncles. It was normal for me to see new people walking around the house I hadn't seen before because my family members would usually bring their friends over. But one thing to note is that we never let people go into our basement. We always keep the basement door shut. So I felt something was off and asked him why he was in our basement. The man said nothing. He looked at me and with an angry expression as if I had offended him or something and started walking towards me. Just then, my grandma noticed everything that was happening and asked the guy who he was and who had invited him. Before the man could answer, my dad and 3 uncles had spotted this crazy man. They started beating and yelling at him. The man started claiming it was an accident and that he had entered the wrong house. But he came from the basement, so no one believed him. They kept on beating him wildly. His nose and lips burst open. He was coughing on blood. They kicked him brutally in his torso and busted a beer bottle open on his face. He managed to get outside into the yard and started running, but we had a German shepherd named Lacey, and she was out there and attacked the man. He was screaming, trying to get over the fence as my uncles, dad, and dog all attacked him simultaneously. At this point, he was covered in blood. He was unrecognizable. Finally, he managed to get over the fence and fell on the other side. He began to crawl. Then I think it dawned on him he was free, so he stood up and tried to run away, only to fall on his face with a loud smack which I'll never forget. I ran in the house frantically trying to convince myself I was dreaming, but the amount of blood on that porch said otherwise. My father and uncles came inside laughing at the guy. Me, my mum, my aunts and cousins went to work to clean up all the food mixed with blood. Having to mop up a puddle of blood is something I'll never forget. It's scarred into my brain. The smell, the dark red color, the thickness of the blood. It was disgusting. They never called the cops. And I don't know what happened to the unconscious man laying on the road face down, bloody and beaten. I don't think I want to know. Later we found out he had apparently broken a window and climbed through to get into our house. The reason we never heard the window breaking is probably because of the loud music and other noises that covered it up. I'm glad he wasn't armed with a weapon of some sort. It could have ended way differently if he did have one. It was Christmas Eve day in 2017. My parents had an emergency and had to leave to go to the hospital as my grandfather was having some medical complications. I'm not sure exactly what he was dealing with, but it must have been serious because my parents drove me and my 2 siblings to my aunt and uncle's house, which wasn't too far from where we lived at the time. As my siblings and I greeted my aunt and uncle, my parents gave them all of our presents so that during Christmas morning we could open them even without our parents there. I felt sad knowing that I had to celebrate Christmas while my parents were somewhere in another state. My cousin and I are super close, so while my brother and sister spent the night on their phones, my cousin and I played hide and seek. Almost an hour went by when we decided to do something else. We went upstairs and started to read comics. My cousin's family is rich, so every time we met he would always show off his huge collection of expensive comics books and toys, and to be honest, I was always jealous. Christmas morning was quite possible the worst day of my life. My cousin woke up at 5 in the morning. He woke everyone up, and we all proceeded to the living room, where almost half the floor was covered in presents for my one cousin. My aunt and uncle brought out mine and my siblings' presents. We finished opening them within 5 minutes. I got just average cheap toys from the local shop. Meanwhile, my cousin wasn't even halfway finished with opening his presents. He was living the dream of any kid. He got a Nintendo Switch, iPhone 8, a new $400 video camera, and much more. I was really jealous comparing my gifts to his. As if my day couldn't get any worse, around noon my parents called and explained that they wouldn't be coming home for another day. I was really annoyed at my life at this point. I decided to take a walk and get some fresh air to calm myself down, so I headed outside. My cousin's house leads out to a small patch of woods. It was snowing pretty heavily when I started to walk into the woods. All I could think about was wanting to go home and be with my parents. My cousin didn't follow me out to the woods, which was odd, as he always seemed to follow me around everywhere. Normally, I would not have walked that far off, but since I was filled with anger and frustration, I decided that I would rather keep on walking than see my cousin playing with all his new things. As childish as it sounds, I was not happy, and at that moment, I didn't even want to be near him because he would probably start showing off his new gifts. The woods were small and went about half a mile deep before coming out the other side to a random highway street. About 100 feet or so into my walk, I came upon this little opening in the woods. 2 logs sat parallel to each other with a small pit in the middle, separating the 2 logs. It was a little fire pit that my cousin said the other teenagers around his neighborhood used to smoke, drink, and do other things away from their parents. I sat down on the rotting log for a minute to catch my breath before I looked over and saw a long stick on the ground. I picked up the stick and walked over to a nearby tree. Out of anger and frustration, I swung it at the tree. In my mind, I was yelling, screaming, and swearing about the whole situation. I hated every single bit of it. The stick broke on the first hit. I stood there at the tree for a second. I threw down the remaining part of the stick and turned around to sit back down. Not even 5 minutes went by when I heard a thump on the dead leaves. At first I ignored it, thinking it was probably some animal. It wasn't until the 3rd or 4th thump that I started to take notice, each one getting closer and closer. When I heard the 5th thump, I stood up and began to scan the surrounding woods. Nothing. I called out asking if someone is there. Nothing but silence. I stood there silently waiting to hear another thump, and I did. This time the thump sounded closer than ever, almost as if the thump had come from right behind me. I took off running. I didn't look back. I didn't wait to see if another thump would follow, and I didn't even stop to think until I was back at my cousin's house. I burst through the door and was met with not only my aunt and uncle, but my parents, who used the excuse of not coming home until the next day to surprise us. We got home, and I thought nothing of what had happened in the woods until I got a text that sent me into panic mode. It was around 10. I had just gotten out of the shower when I heard my phone buzzing on the sink. It was my cousin, asking if I had seen someone suspicious in the woods when I went for a walk. I texted back saying no. It took him a little longer to reply, but his next message basically said, after we left there was a strange guy who stood outside my cousin's house and just stared at their property. I could feel the panic rising. I texted back quickly, asking him what the guy looked like. Homeless, he said, and that was it. He ignored all of my further questions and did not want to talk about it anymore. I never got to know what that homeless-looking guy wanted, why or how he followed me back to my cousin's house. Does this mean he was running behind me when I was running away? Either way, I'm glad I made it home safely. Who knows what kind of bad intentions that guy had.